I want to start off with a number, which is 430,461. That is the number of people that are projected to move to Santa Clara County in the next 20 years.
Wow.
So that is, well, Palo Alto, I think, is about 70,000. So I am wondering where in your neighborhood you're planning to put 6 new Palo Altos in the next 20 years. So for decades, we've recognized the values of smart growth and walkable neighborhoods and transit-oriented development, especially. Yet the reality is that most current land use policies still basically enforce a car-dependent pattern of zoning land with segregated uses at very, very low densities. So the question is, where do we find spaces for 430,000 people and do it in an environmentally responsible and equitable way? Let's see if I can. There we go. Okay. So in Seattle, we've relied heavily on this, what's called an urban village strategy, where it's transit-oriented development. In the last 20 years, 77% of all new households have moved into housing units that have been developed in only 7% of the land area, these so-called urban villages. I mean, it's great that they're oriented around transit and light rail. However, all the areas around those urban villages have not changed much at all. This graphic here shows where it's purple and kind of tall spikes. That's the population density greater than 12,500 people per square mile. A little different metric, but and then you can see the yellow and orange areas, which are traditional single-family zones, and those places are actually losing population because the residents that live there are getting older. They're either moving out or they may be dying, and that there aren't the young families that can afford to replace them. Now, the reality is that where we are going in Seattle, and I think that this is happening just about everywhere, is this idea of basically 2 cities. That one that is denser, younger, more diverse, and majority renter, situated around mass transit, and then another city which is richer, wider, older, and where the housing is eminently less affordable. This idea that there are 2 cities coexisting, or I should say, well, maybe not coexisting is the right term, but that's not necessarily new. Martin Luther King Jr. Said that every city in our country has this kind of dualism, schizophrenia, split into so many parts, so that every city ends up being 2 cities rather than 1. And I think that if we look at in Seattle, our projected growth around in King County, about 630,000 people in the next 20 years, we have the same issue. And our only plan right now is to pour more and more people into those same 7% of land area. And it's just not a very sustainable, equitable pattern. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some strategies for missing middle housing, because it extends the territory in which we can find places for new opportunities for people to live. The lens that I've been looking at this through is what I call green zoning. Green zoning is just putting people close to jobs, transit, schools, parks, and the amenities that they want, so that they can live a low carbon life. That's a huge benefit just in terms of sustainability, but that also has incredible ramifications for equity in terms of housing diversity, where people can live, opening up those neighborhoods, the quality of various school districts, and the amenities that we've already built, and those investments in parks, et cetera, that some people are certainly excluded from. So this is not so much a one-size-fits-all prescription. Whatever the density is of your neighborhood, there is always space to find for new housing opportunities. even when zoning says that that neighborhood is full. Now, I think whenever you talk about new households or density, you know, there's a lot of fear, a lot of pushback, a lot of worry about what does that mean. And you know, Elaine had some great examples of how terrifying those little cottages are at you know, non-conforming densities. In Seattle, we have a very similar scare story here. Here is the Pine Street cottages. This is, these little houses are built, you know, this is 3 or 4 times the density of the surrounding neighborhood, totally non-conforming, but incredibly popular. These little cottages sell for $750,000, and they're all under 800 square feet. If there's something so powerful about the walkable neighborhoods that we used to build, that people are thirsty for. So I also want to say that, you know, I think it's important as we're having these conversations about density, that, you know, if we're only illustrating our stories with pictures like these, it's a bit of a bait and switch, because I know that if we're developing new projects, they are not going to look like this. And so, so I want to acknowledge this, but sort of move on to like other typologies. So in 2019, Seattle passed 2 zoning reforms. One was reducing the barriers to ADUs. And here are 2 ADUs. They're back to back on either side of the alley. We designed both of those for 2 obviously very, very different clients. But these days, we can have not one backyard cottage, but a backyard cottage and an accessory dwelling unit. So essentially taking your R1 zoning, which you guys have, and turning it into 3 or a principal unit and 2 accessories. And so the goal there is, you know, essentially, you know, tripling the density. And we are currently working on several projects where they're kind of like co-housing like projects, where we have a single family homeowner who wants to provide housing for their nanny and also have a rental. And so they're building a cottage and doing an ADU. And that is a really, really compelling way to split up the land cost and keep friends and family close and build community. The other zoning ordinance that we changed was this creation of what's in Seattle is called residential small lot, which I think would be comparable to the R2 that you have. It takes essentially all the R1 lots around the most dense areas, the sort of neighborhood villages, and basically doubles the density. Now, because we are able to do accessory dwelling units without owner occupancy, you can you know, essentially create condo associations and lots of different configurations within residential small lot. This project here that I'm showing is we're taking the footprint of an existing 1-story single family house and then subdividing it into 2 townhouses, adding a story, and then creating 2 ADUs in the basement, and then in the backyard, creating kind of an oversized backyard cottage, but it acts as a duplex. And so you go from 1 lot or 1 household on this lot to 6, and yet you haven't really changed the perceptual, like the scale from street level. The other thing that this zoning allows, which I think we'll see a lot more of, is just duplexes and triplexes, because the density allows for a little bit, you know, for more households, and also how you can slice this up with accessory dwelling units. And so this rendering here is of a stacked flat, so 2 stories, and then the sort of box on the right side is an adjoining ADU, 1 for each one of those units. And so we're taking just a standard Seattle lot and creating 4 units, and this could be subdivided, or not subdivided, but owned independently as 4 condos in like a co-op or a condo association. It's too bad that we don't build flats anymore, in part because of people's, really wanting to have ground-related housing. But I think with the upcoming silver wave of boomers wanting to downsize but stay in their neighborhood, there's going to be a demand for more universally designed locations that are, smaller, much more affordable, and very, very urban. This is another possibility. This is on a double lot where we've taken 2 parcels together, and each one of these individual parcels is 6,000 square feet. On this, we'd be able to build 3 principal units and 3 ADUs, and then it's basically mirrored. And then we were trying to put back together the public space and create kind of a courtyard cottage sort of scheme. And this is something that I think is super exciting because 1, it's going to be a lot more affordable. 2, the scale of this zoning is really similar to single family. And so and the other thing is that with this zoning, you can also preserve a house in front and build something in the back. And so it's a way also for existing homeowners to be able to kind of make something more out of their property through resale or redevelopment. So I think that this is something that we'll see a lot more of. We're just starting to study these projects. The zoning just passed less than a year ago. So this is one of our first ones. On the left, you're seeing, this is actually 3 lots put together where the large blue block in the lower left-hand corner is the original homeowner, and they have a garden in the middle of their plot. And then there's 2 plots to the east of them. And they were looking at, well, what can we do with that? And it can be anywhere from 12 to 14 different units between ADUs, backyard cottages, and that could be row houses, it could be a mix, it could be row houses, cottages, duplexes. I think the great thing about this zoning, and the thing that I would want anyone who's looking at zoning reform to think about is to not be afraid of flexibility. It's really, we worry too much about what form the final building is going to take when we think about zoning, but in reality, what we want to have, and if we're going to support housing production, is you want to make it as easy as possible to come up with great solutions. So, I love this project, but of course, thanks to the recession, they're on hold. And then I wanted to just throw one more thing in here, which I think is an opportunity that I think for neighborhoods that are maybe a little bit more dense and developed, in the mid-century, there was all the space that we've allocated towards parking is actually an opportunity to redevelop. Both of these projects were on the original parking lots of the structure in the front yard. And so on the left, it's an old triplex, and they had a parking lot and a little bit of a yard. And now we've added 10 apartments behind this existing triplex. And then on the right, it is 4 units. You can't see the one that's kind of a daylit basement, but 4 units that stack up. And that also is on the back of an apartment building. And so, we have, for the areas that are zoned for multifamily, there's a ton of parking, there's a ton of open space. We just have to keep our eyes open for it. Let's see, this last little slide, this is just going back to an original study of all the different housing types. This is taking a Seattle single family neighborhood and just looking at what happens when you allow for stacked flats, apartments, duplexes, little cottages, all those things to happen. In this case, what I'm showing is doubling the number of households in this neighborhood, and yet the impact in the street over a course of a generation is not that crazy. I think one of the most important lessons about this is when talking about upzoning or zoning reform or anything like that, this isn't the end of the single family house. This is just the recognition that the single family zoning is unhealthy for the city. It's unhealthy for the planet. But you know, we're just opening the door for other types of housing, stacked flats, duplexes, triplexes, things that we used to build, we used to know how to build before they were zoned out of existence. Land use policy dictates where people live and work, and in many ways, you know, the entire course of our lives. And these policies either are baking in car dependency, they're baking in you know, class and race segregation, or they can be an opportunity to break those structures down. So I think there's so much potential in our existing neighborhoods, and it doesn't have to come at a sort of radical price. We just have to be open to that opportunity. Thanks.